Welcome to the All Outdoors Photography Podcast. This podcast is about all things outdoor photography, including landscapes, wildlife, macro, and more. The show features two talented photographers, Henry Doyle and Ryan Taylor, who bring their different experiences in photography to the podcast. The show is released weekly every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so I hope you sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. In today's episode, Henry and Ryan talked to Chris Corradino, an accomplished photographer who has been a teacher for the New York Institute of Photography, Ansel Adams Gallery, and started his own classroom venture with New Zealand Photo School. We talk about traveling and staying local for photography, how creativity goes hand in hand with the camera, and take risks in order to grow your photography business and career.
Welcome back to episode 35 of the All Outdoors Photography Podcast, and today we have a very special guest on.
Yes, we have Chris Corradino on the show. Thank you so much, Chris, for coming on. Just go ahead and tell us who you are and what you do.
Thanks so much, guys. I'm really happy to be here. I am a photographer living in New Zealand, in the North Island. I teach people how to take better pictures, and I've done that both in New York, starting in New York at the New York Institute of Photography, and then I traveled over to Yosemite National Park and also led workshops around the world. And now I'm doing it here in New Zealand. It's quite beautiful. But my passion is outdoor photography. I love nature, but I like all types of photography, and teaching it also just makes me really happy. I find that giving people the ability to express themselves creatively through their camera is just such a worthwhile pursuit. So that's what I do.
Awesome. Yeah.
Awesome.
You've really kind of covered the entire world, it seems. So tell me about maybe like one of your favorite locations you've lived in or shot at so far in your career.
Yeah, I've been really blessed, very lucky. I never expected that photography would lead me to these places. When I started out living in New York, I was just photographing like the local lake and the swans and the geese and just nothing really spectacular, but I just loved connecting with wildlife and the natural world. And then from there, I just kind of got lucky and I put myself out there. And before you knew it, I was working for a newspaper, and that led to more opportunities. And the next thing I know, I'm sailing like across the Mediterranean, teaching people how to use their DSLRs. Wow. And, on that particular trip, some spectacular locations were these little islands like Malta. I never expected to be in Malta. And it was south of Italy, quite beautiful. Another spectacular location was Iceland. If you haven't been there yet, it is a photographer's paradise. I mean, just off the chart when it comes to natural beauty. Also with Iceland, there are no like major hotel chains outside of the major city. So everything is just really natural. You're connecting with people. There's just small B&Bs, bed and breakfasts. So that was a real highlight for me. But I find that the cool thing about photography is that you don't have to travel far to make amazing photos. And it's one of my challenges is how do I create something awesome on a day-to-day basis in my backyard? Because I mean, even now, like when we have this pandemic and all this, it's like, well, we can't necessarily travel all over the world, but we could still take amazing photos if we use our mind and work at it properly.
Wow. Yeah.
It's neat how you adopted that principle throughout your entire life. Like you could be in Yosemite, like you said, but like you'd still be in your backyard necessarily and just being local and just taking photos that way. That's really neat.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in like the importance of personal projects. So, I mean, even as an example, if you're just trying to stay fit and healthy, and you take a walk every night after dinner, and you bring your camera, you might be walking the same several blocks every night. And you could look at that as a restriction, or you could look at it as an opportunity. So like, could you challenge your mind to find pictures and to see the potential in those several blocks on a daily basis? Or do you look at it and say, it's the same old thing, it's kind of boring, what can I really do? So I like to look at it as opportunity and say, all right, here I am. Maybe I'm in the middle of a boring parking lot at a Kmart or something, but I bet you that there's something in that parking lot that could be used to create something spectacular and beautiful if you approach it the right way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that repetition of knowing your location well really allows you to get much better shots than if you were just kind of visiting.
For sure. And to see things like in different seasons, to see how they change, that's a big one. But also just to challenge yourself photographically. So like maybe you photograph the same street 800 times, but on the 801st time, maybe you say, well, I'm going to try intentional camera movement. Or maybe I'm going to shift my white balance into tungsten or incandescent and shift the light to like a bluish tint. Or maybe I'll try black and white or something along those lines. So, I just like to keep those creative juices flowing. And I find that the more I get out with the camera, the more I see creatively.
You find yourself is it just like how am I trying to say this? So you basically see everything in everyday life, basically, in like a photography standpoint?
Yeah, you start to see life as a camera sees it. Because as you know, the human eye sees things very differently than this camera. We take it all in and we're like, oh man, this is a spectacular scenic vista. But we're looking from the left to the right. We're kind of scanning the horizon. The camera just has this little 2:3 aspect ratio, right? So we need to kind of train our eye to see the way that the camera sees. And a lot of that comes down to like simplification, getting rid of distracting elements and all of that.
Yeah, you're kind of taking in the whole scene and then picking out the good elements of it.
Right. So to train yourself, and this is something that I teach in my classes, which is just like non-technical. It's just boiling it down to what's really important here. What part of the scene really speaks to me? And once you identify that particular part of the scene, then you could work visually to bring attention to it.
What do you think draws you towards the more creative aspects of photography? Like you said, lighting and composition versus like the technical for a workshop?
So the technical is important. I mean, there's just no way around it. If you want to create something that is pre-visualized, you need to know how to do that. So if I want my photo to look soft and sort of shallow as far as the depth of field, I know I need to be at f2.8 or f1.8 or whatever it may be for that particular lens. Or if I know I want to show the motion of a waterfall, I need to be on a tripod using a slow shutter speed of about 1/15 of a second, right? So those sorts of technical understandings are important, but it's only part of the game. And I feel like I kind of named it mind over megapixels. The technical details are important, but it's the mind that ultimately makes the difference because everyone has a camera these days. Everyone has a camera phone. DSLRs are getting more affordable. Mirrorless cameras are smaller and easier to carry. So, you go to these places and everyone's shooting everything. And it makes my job as a professional harder in a good way. Like, how do I create something different? And the technical is only part of it. It's the mind that ultimately sets us apart, though.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of workshop leaders and photographers, they seem to focus on the technical, like you're saying, but not everyone does that creatively, this embodying of the work and everything. And trying to teach creativities can be kind of tricky, I think, overall too.
Yeah, and some people are afraid, or they doubt themselves and they say, I'm not a trained artist. I've never been very good at painting or drawing or photography. But again, like any instrument, like a guitar or a piano, you don't just sit down and start banging out Mozart or Beethoven. You need to practice it. And it's the same with the camera. The more you carry that thing with you, the more you think in terms of pictures, and the better you become, the more developed your eye becomes.
Yeah. So would you say when you're out taking pictures, are you more of like a documentary kind of photographer that you photograph everything, or do you kind of zero in a little bit on one or two details?
Great question. Great question. So for a little while, I was all about just nature and the natural world, and like I would go out of my way to not include a human being in a photograph.
Mm.
And then later in my career, I started to learn that if I incorporated human elements into a scene, there was actually more visual interest, more universal appeal. And as a side product, they became more commercially successful. So they sold better. But also, just creatively speaking, they were just more interesting. To have a pier going off into the distance on a horizon with a guy in a red jacket at the end was just more visually appealing than without. So I started to incorporate human elements into my landscapes. And then I think in addition to that, it's important to show tighter compositions of detail. So maybe the rope that is, docking the boat on the pier as a close-up, that helps to tell part of the story. So I like to think of myself in terms of like a visual storyteller. If I'm selling this piece to a magazine, it's not just about the hero shot, the one photo. You need to have those smaller details as well.
Have you ever done photojournalism?
Yeah, that's really how I started. I started working as a sports photographer for a newspaper, and I was doing like high school and college sports, and it was great. One day I'd be shooting football, the next day soccer, field hockey. The next day I'd be like in a gymnasium doing volleyball, so it was always different. And then from there, they said, "Hey, Chris, the main guy called out sick. Do you think you can go photograph, this guy as they lead him out of prison?" And I was like, "Oh, I was kind of scared, but I was like, all right, yeah, I'll do it." And within like a few weeks, that turned into a whole new path for me, where I needed to start cutting back on hours at my customer service job so that I could spend more time doing photography for the newspaper. And the tide sort of shifted there, and that's really how I got my start.
Yeah, the reason I asked that was you brought up like storytelling and everything, and it kind of sounded to me like almost like photo essays with photojournalism. You get the supporting detail shots and everything between there. So yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, it's important. And a cool thing that I see now, like a big trend, obviously with people using drones, getting like overhead shots as part of your story, I think is valuable. Even if you don't have a drone, if you could just get up high, and get like an overhead sort of perspective, I think that really helps. If you look in like Nat Geo, you'll often see shots from way above. And I also really believe in the value of like getting down and dirty, laying down in the dirt and getting that sort of perspective, especially for landscape photography. I think it's a great perspective. So,
yeah.
All tripod also helps too,
Oh, yeah.
and with no center column, you can pretty much get both those perspectives pretty well.
Yeah, I actually went out of my way to find a tripod with no center column because I wanted that thing to get as low to the ground as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Me too. Yeah, me too.
Same here.
I got spoiled once I realized those exist.
Yeah. So one of the places that this is kind of a personal thing, like one of the places that really caught my eye about where you've lived over your times is Yosemite. Just because I'm actually going there in 2 weeks, so 2 weeks from now I'll be there. So can you tell us a little bit about
That's
your
awesome.
Yosemite experience?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my first visit to Yosemite was in 2005, like way early in my career. I had just transitioned to digital photography from film. So I was really excited about that. And man, I got to Yosemite and I was just floored, like mouth agape. You have to be kidding me. Like this is not real. Like I'll never forget as you come through this place called Tunnel View, just literally gasping for breath as I saw the view for the first time. It's spectacular. So you're in for a real treat, Henry. It's quite amazing. So I get out there and I camped there for 2 weeks and I loved it. And I was just out all day and night photographing. So it had a special place in my heart already. And then I think it was around 2018 or so, I applied to the Ansel Adams Gallery as a teacher. And they were like, hey, thanks so much, but we don't really have anything right now. And then sure enough, like a year later, they got back to me and they were like, come on down.
Wow. What are the chances of that?
So, and that's the thing. So I think that's an important point though, because like as photographers, we need to put ourselves out there. Like I told the story about when I was a sports photographer and then I started shooting photojournalism with news. I was scared at first. It was sort of outside of my comfort zone, but I did it anyway. And with Yosemite, I just put myself out there and I said, here I am, and they said no at first, right? They were like, we don't have anything. I could have taken that as rejection, but I said, oh, all right, well, keep me on file. And sure enough, it turned into something. So you have to put yourself out there. So they said, come on down. I was living in New York at the time. I sold my house. And I moved across the country. I packed all my belongings into a small car, just drove across the country, and I taught photography there for like maybe 4 months. And it was amazing. I mean, I'm living in the shadow of Yosemite Falls, and I'm teaching people from all over the world. Yosemite is visited by 5 million people a year, and they're not just Americans, they're from all over. And they all have different experience levels and different cameras and different interests, but they're all after basically the same thing. Capturing like Ansel Adams sort of vision, right? Everyone is looking for these postcard shots of Half Dome, El Capitan, Yosemite Falls, Bridal Veil Falls. And that's cool. And I would help them achieve that, but I would also try to challenge them to create something that was special to them beyond the postcard moments. Postcard moments are great, but what about something that speaks to you? Maybe it's a blade of grass that's lit from behind. Maybe it's a coyote that's kind of nestled in the tall grass, or a butterfly landing weed. Quieter moments in nature that are a little more introspective than the big, bold postcards.
Yeah, and kind of getting those universal images that aren't necessarily always tied to the location, so you can kind of carry them with you as well.
Yeah, I mean, because Yosemite is a spectacular wilderness. It's not just about what Ansel shot. So it was a unique challenge for me where like part of my job was to get the gallery images for their Instagram and Facebook feeds. And they would send me out on a daily basis in the same area at high noon. And it's like, all right, well, what can I do at high noon when the light is terrible and I'm in the same area every day? And it kind of goes back to what I was saying about like being in a parking lot in Kmart. Well, can I create something here? Yes, it's Yosemite, but the light sucks right now. And I'm in the same spot that I was in yesterday. So how can I make this work? And it really challenged me to grow and to just sort of expand my vision.
Yeah, working.
I would say that, there's a lot of pressure there when you're just walking the same footsteps as Ansel to take the, the big, like you said, postcard worthy shots. But yeah, it's really neat that you kind of broke the mold there and taught people other
And even pressure from social media as well too, with Yosemite being like one of the most photographed locations. I'm sure there was a lot there as well.
For sure. And the cool thing was, like, although that place is so highly visited, if you get out during different times of day, so like when I wasn't teaching in the gallery and I was on my own, I would go back to places after the sun had already set, and I would be like alone in, say, Cook's Meadow, which is one of the most famous meadows because it's right in the middle of um, Yosemite Falls, Upper and Lower Falls. So I would like camp out there, set up my tripod, and just wait. And just spectacular things would happen, and I would be alone in this majestic mountain at Yosemite, as like the stars sort of twirled above and the full moon lit up the waterfall and like a lunar rainbow appeared. And I was like,
Wow.
You have to be kidding me. I can't believe I'm here right now.
Yeah. I think what really separates the great photographers is the ability to go out at weird hours of the day when it's not convenient, but it ends up producing great shots. So
Yeah, I know you guys did a podcast on time of day, in the magic hour. And that's absolutely essential when it comes to landscape photography, but I try not to limit myself to that. Like, going at it high noon, maybe it's a better time for black and white photography because the shadows are harsh and the contrast is different. So you get like a more moody photograph. And often I would find that when the light was bad, that was an ideal time to shoot in black and white.
Yeah, I found that to be
but yeah, for sure. And the benefit in shooting in black and white too is you don't see as much digital noise because noise is sort of red, green, and blue. So it hides the noise if you were shooting at super high ISOs.
So over that 4 months, like how many people did you teach, like on a daily basis or a weekly basis?
Hundreds. I lost count because some of the groups would be like 20 and 30 people. And like I said, all different cameras, different skill levels, different accents, people from all over. So it was quite fascinating, and I loved it. And like one of my sort of goals would be if I could get people lying down in the grass, in Cook's Meadow, photographing Yosemite Falls from different angles and just giving them things to think about. I was happy, and usually it was like an hour to an hour and a half, and we would cover so much in that time. And sometimes people would then book like privates with me, and I would take them out specially like later in the evening or whatever. So it just led to other opportunities. And I would find that like the more I put into my teaching, the more everyone would get out of it. So I just tried to just, pour my heart into all the classes. I loved it.
awesome.
I bet being off the grid, so to speak, really helped your creativity as well, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, one of the benefits was my house, my little like cottage or whatever you want to call it, was situated on the Merced River, which is the big river that cuts through Yosemite National Park. So I would just hang out in the backyard and photograph and just write in my journal. And I mean, it was a spectacular, like spiritual healing place. It really served me quite well.
That's awesome. Yeah. So after
Really
4
just-
months, did they let you go, or did you just kind of step away from it?
So I could have stayed there forever. I had a job there. I loved it. The people were nice. But what happens is in autumn, snow comes and the park is not nearly as visited. So tourism slows down quite a bit. I had an opportunity to do some other things. So that kind of leads to the next chapter of my life, which was a humongous jump and a leap, which was moving to New Zealand. So as much as I loved it in Yosemite, I opted to make sort of a bigger move.
Yeah. So you want to go into that a bit? Your move to New Zealand?
Yeah, so I had taught a photo workshop in New Zealand a couple years back in the North Island in a place called Hawke's Bay. Hawke's Bay is mountainous, yet also near oceans. Um, there's waterfalls and scenery and vineyards and all that, so it's quite pretty. Um, and there's also some cities nearby, like Wellington and all that. So it's quite a special and unique place. And I taught some photographers here for about 2 weeks, and I absolutely fell in love with the place. Long story short, I met my partner here, and we decided that we would move the whole family to New Zealand. And I figured I would teach photography in New Zealand. So I created the NZ Photo School, New Zealand Photo School. And I do basically what I did in New York and Yosemite, but here in New Zealand. I teach people either in one-on-one lessons or group lessons, or even on Zoom, how to take better pictures, how to edit their photos in Lightroom, how to organize their computers. And it's been spectacular. And I happened to arrive right before the world sort of went haywire with the pandemic, which was just luck because, as you've probably seen, New Zealand was very lucky. We didn't really get into a whole big lockdown and all of that. So I was out photographing and teaching people throughout the year, which has been really lucky and amazing.
Awesome. So what would you say were like one of the biggest challenges moving over here?
Yeah, so I mean, without a doubt, the biggest challenge is being so far from family and friends. I mean, it's a different day right now than it is for you guys. It's a different season. It's spring for you, it's autumn for me. It's Tuesday for you, it's Wednesday for me, different times of day and all that. So that's really hard. But thankfully, with technology, FaceTime, video calls, and all that, I can stay in touch with my family and friends. The other thing was just as a New Yorker, as an American, starting a business in a new country is a unique challenge. And I still have clients in the States. So all of a sudden, I had to figure out how to create like an international business where I'm accepting money from people in the States into an American account and in New Zealand and a New Zealand account. So I just had to set up like this whole new infrastructure. And that took time. That was a challenge.
I can't even imagine. It's quite the transition, but it seems like it's been very successful for you. So congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's been so cool because listen, I mean, for me, like I've always just wanted to do something that was meaningful and worthwhile and helped other people in their lives. And for some people, like the most obvious example of that would be like being a doctor, right? When you're a doctor, you're physically helping people or maybe mentally helping people, and that's amazing. So the thing is, I feel like the arts are similar in that you're just helping people's souls and their creative abilities, and that's just as powerful as their body. You know, I mean, you could argue maybe not in some instances, but really at the heart of it, I think it is equally as important. So if I'm able to teach a mother how to photograph her children better, that's going to lead to a lifetime of memories, photographs, and just wonderful experiences for her and her family. So to me, that's special.
I just wanted to jump in here and say that Chris is actually offering 10% off his photography mentoring sessions at nzphotoschool.com, exclusively for the podcast listeners here. So you can use promo code No Limits. That's No Limits with no spaces. So it's NOLIMITS. Use that on the website nzphotoschool.com, and you could get 10% off his very helpful photography mentoring session. So thanks, Chris, for this lovely opportunity for our listeners, and let's get back to the podcast.
What do you think like draws you to teaching people?
So the first thing was I wanted to be able to give people clear information that I was having trouble finding when I first started. Because when I first started, it was like the argument was like, is digital or film better? And people would fight, on either side of the argument. Or, there was like a lot of misinformation online where people would be these like proclaimed experts saying, you should never do this, or you should, never center your composition or whatever, or you should always use a UV filter, whatever it may be. They were like really adamant and firm in their opinion, and people would buy into it. Oh yes, this supposed expert said that I should never use a UV filter. And I was like, you know what? Like, that's just not accurate. It's misleading. And in some instances, they were selling products under the guise of like teaching. And I was like, that's just really misleading. So I wanted to be able to be like a voice of reason, that I'm not selling a product. I'm not affiliated with any other company. I don't work for Canon or whatever. So if I'm telling you that like, you can take amazing pictures with a Canon Rebel from 6 years ago that you got used somewhere, like, I'm not making any affiliate money. I'm just telling you from my own experience the truth. So I wanted to be able to bring people like an honest, educated opinion, so that they could find their creative vision and speak their truth through their camera without any strings attached.
It's very refreshing, because I feel like people might view those sort of like workshop leaders, I guess, as like used car salesmen, like they're trying to like offer a product or service, but you're just kind of like no frills, and you just want to teach them to take the better photos. And
yeah, I don't do like, ads or sponsored, posts or whatever. I just keep it like it's me. I just want to help people get the best possible results, and I love what I do. I'm just so grateful for the opportunity, and to this day, I can't believe where photography has led me. It's been something I could have never, ever planned. It's just happened. Opportunities come my way. What drives me to take those opportunities? The thing is, when opportunities come your way, they're rarely presented in a way that you thought that you were prepared for. So like, when I got the job at Yosemite, I didn't realize I was gonna have to like sell my house and move across the country and all that like in 2 weeks time. Or when I moved to start the school in New Zealand, that I'd be on the opposite side of the world than my friends and family. So like, they don't always present themselves in the most straightforward manner. So I just think that taking risks is so important. And often when you take a risk, the reward is great. And sometimes as artists, we need to kind of be in a position where our back is against the wall and we're challenged and it's scary. And we're like, wait a second, what am I going to do? How do I fix this? How do I make this happen? And I think when that sort of presents itself, it makes us better. We grow outside of our comfort zone. So if I'm photographing sports, the things that I learned photographing sports are going to help me in my nature photography or portrait photography. It's all sort of related. I'll give you an example. As a teacher, I was hired to do this big workshop in the Mediterranean, and it was 100-passenger ship, like a super fancy yacht through the Mediterranean for 2 weeks. And I'm like, man, these people are going to have amazing cameras. They're going to have like the top of the line, everything. So I created all these like pretty advanced presentations with, breaking down histograms and the importance of like white balance and working with exposure and all these different things, right? And I get on the ship and I meet the people, and half of them were using phones. And there were some people with DSLRs and some with point and shoots and some with mirrorless cameras, but a huge percentage were using phones. And I was like, whoa, my presentations are way too technical for these people, and this is a problem. So like I felt like my back was against the wall. So I literally went into my cabin, I shut the door, and I broke out my laptop and created a new presentation called The 14 Secrets of Great Photography. And it was non-technical. It was stuff that anybody could apply to their photography no matter what camera they were using. And I gave that presentation to the whole ship. It went super well. And I ended up turning that into a book. And I've given that talk, in various places. And it's been a big, successful sort of presentation. And it was because I was in a place that was outside of my comfort zone, back against the wall. And sometimes that's just how you grow.
Yeah, when you're under pressure to create, usually you get the best product out of it.
It seems like it. It can be, it can be one of the ways to create. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, so
It's
it
neat
seems
how
like
the
you
technology.
shoot.
Okay. It seems neat. It's neat how the technology, as it gets more accessible, really, photography is like a universal language, and so people can take great pictures with the phone. They don't really need a DSLR necessarily.
Yeah, absolutely. Granted, with the phone, maybe you don't have as much resolution or as much cropping forgiveness and all of that. But ultimately, it does get back to, emotions don't need interpretation, and it doesn't matter if you're photographing beauty, decay, chaos, peace. The camera reveals truth in a way that we can all understand, and it doesn't matter if that's a DSLR or a phone.
Yeah. So it seems like you shoot like a great variety of genres. Do you have any favorites? Like, would you say nature's your favorite, or do you just kind of?
Good question. I love nature for sure. And I don't go out necessarily for the pictures. Like I go out for peace of mind. Like there are times I'm just like, I just want to take a walk in solitude in nature and listen to the sound of the river. And if I happen to get a great shot, awesome. But if I come home empty-handed, so be it. At least I got out there and took a beautiful walk. So I do love nature, but I also love photographing air shows. They're fascinating. Like, talk about like heart thumping energy. When you're photographing an F-18 screaming down the coast at 500 miles an hour with vapor clouds bursting around its wings, it's powerful. So I love that. I love photographing sports. So those are some of my favorites. I also really enjoy macro photography. It's pretty cool to explore the world through a small, detailed look.
Yeah, I think many people, like many pros, will say that you need to like niche down to like one style of photography to be successful. But
Yeah.
I think you proved them wrong for sure. You can really diversify yourself.
That was interesting. Thank you for saying that. When I was first building my website, that was like a big thing where people were like, you should only show like the work that you want to do, and there's some value in that. But I just feel like labeling yourself is limiting yourself. So I didn't want to call myself, a landscape photographer or a portrait photographer because that's just super limiting. So I'd rather call myself like a visual detective. I'm here to uncover truth with my camera, and whatever that leads me to, it leads me to, and I'm open to it.
Yeah. Great philosophy.
Yeah, I feel like you can get stuck in a rut if you subject matter indefinitely, but I've been finding that too with my work is just you need to really just find ways to experiment out your comfort zone.
For sure. Yeah. Like photographing weddings isn't necessarily my cup of tea because it's sort of formulated. Like you have a general shot list that you have to capture, but another way of looking at it is it's also a great opportunity to be exceptionally creative, and really set up memories for someone for a lifetime, for their whole family history. So, it goes back to perspective. And I really do believe that your perspective on life sort of dictates how happy you are, and also how successful you are as a photographer. And it's funny. I mean, obviously, the parallels to perspective in life and in your mind is glaring with the perspective of what focal length you're using, or how you see the world through a camera. So I believe there are a lot of similarities there.
That's really neat. Yeah. If you don't mind, I actually want to kind of rewind a little bit, because I know you talked briefly about your stay in New York. I actually found out about you, Chris, through the New York Institute of Photography. You're one of the mentors there. So yeah, how'd that all come about?
Yeah, it's great. It was my first big break. Basically, I was a passionate photographer, amateur photographer. And just to be clear, like, there's nothing wrong with being an amateur photographer. If you look at the word amateur, what it actually means broken down is for the love of. And I was taking pictures because I loved it, not because I was making money. And I was working in a job that I absolutely hated. I mean, it's just no other way of saying it. I know that's not super diplomatic, but I really didn't like this job, but it was paying the bills, and I was, not really sure what I was going to do with my life. But I was passionate about taking pictures. And one day I had a really rough day. Like, my boss was coming down on me, and I came home and I was just super frustrated. And I went online, I think it was Craigslist, and I was poking around the web looking for jobs. And I said, oh, let me just look in the photography field. And I see this post, and it's like, hey, we're looking for a photography teacher. So send your resume here. So I'm like, you know what? I'm not really fully qualified. And, all those like thoughts of doubt kind of crept in. And I said, the hell with it. I'm really pissed off. I'm just going to submit my resume. And I did. And then I kind of forgot about it. And a few weeks later, I got an email from the dean who was like, hey, come to New York and have a talk with us. So I did. And sure enough, like, I worked there for 11 years. And it was amazing. Yeah. So I got to quit my customer service job, and like, I'll never forget like giving that terrible boss my like letter of resignation. It's like the greatest day, something out of a movie almost. But like, I gave him my resignation, and I was like, thanks for everything. But I got an opportunity I can't pass up, and it just set me on this new trajectory that has led me here.
Wow.
Yeah, it's going back to what you said of those random opportunities that you may not expect just appearing one day, and changes your life forever. So
yeah, and taking chances, like, on paper, like, I didn't think I had the qualifications, but it would have been me limiting myself. So it goes back to that whole thing, like, labeling yourself as limiting yourself. So like, not letting doubt take over or fear take over and doing it anyway, that's where taking risk can become rewards.
Yeah. Something though. I mean, just to see your whole trajectory, you've been all over the world. You've seen all these things. You photographed different genres all across the board. Yeah, that's just really a lot of people that too. Just your resume, I guess.
Thank you. I mean, I couldn't have planned it that way. I did not get a degree in photography. I don't necessarily have the best gear or anything like that. I'm passionate about it. I've worked hard, and I put myself out there. So that's like the biggest piece of advice I would give to people who want to like make photography their career, is get in positions that scare you and do it anyway. And when I was out in New York, I was terrified of photographing people on the streets. Like, the idea of turning my camera onto a stranger and photographing them was like sickening to me, because I was all about like photographing, as I said, like, a swan or a goose or something in this beautiful lake. And here I am in Manhattan, and there's just people pulsing all around me, and it's just insanity. And it was super interesting, and I really wanted to capture it, but I was scared. And I didn't know if someone would like punch me in the face or what, so I was like, I'm just gonna do it anyway. And I stepped out of that comfort zone, and I started shooting street scenes in black and white. It was terrifying and also exhilarating all at the same time. And the idea was basically to capture life in its unplanned imperfection. So I would shoot from the hip, and when I would do it, I would like feel my heart beating. Like I could just, it's sort of like photographing an air show. The energy was just so great. So I knew I was kind of on the right track because, anytime you feel that sort of exhilaration, I just feel like it's a good sign. So I would photograph these people on the streets, and it turned into like this whole series of street photography that I'm really pleased with.
It's almost like that exhilarating feeling you're describing. It's like your gut and this is going to scare you, but you got to do it,
Yeah, and you don't want to overthink it. Like there are times when I'm driving the car and I'm like, oh man, look at that scene. And like, you just kind of flip on the blinker, slow down, pull into the shoulder safely, and take the shot. Mm-hmm. If you start thinking about like, well, maybe there's a better spot up there to pull off, and is this the right location? You just overthink it and you screw it up. So I like to just kind of get out of my own way and listen. When my mind says there's something here, just listen to that and then figure it out afterwards. So that connection between like your brain and your finger on the shutter is important. And I think a lot of people put walls up in between that connection. They overthink it and then they miss the moment. So I do teach that in a workshop. And basically it's this. It's you're walking along and something intrigues you. At that moment, it's time to pause, bring the camera to your eye, and shoot it.
Yeah.
Instead of just, well, is the light good? What's my aperture right now? What about my white balance? So like, it's sometimes the technical stuff or the gear gets in the way. Sometimes it's your own doubt, and it just creates this wall, and then you just don't take the photo because you've overthought it. So what I like to do is, if something intrigues me, I capture it, and then later, that's where the evaluation happens. When I dump all the photos into Lightroom, that's when I'm like, oh, that's why I was interested in that. This whole scene is all green, and there's this one red piece of clothing on a clothesline or whatever, and that's sort of interesting, or whatever it may be. And maybe I don't even know what drew me in until a couple of years later. Like there are times I look back at shots that I've taken years ago, and I'm like, now I understand what spoke to me about that moment. So you have to kind of sit with images for a while before you ultimately get their full meaning. At least that's been the case for me.
Mm-hmm. And also, like, I think it's really important to not shoot what you might think would get likes on social media, but rather shoot exactly what you see, exactly what catches your eye,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great point. I absolutely agree with you. In fact, in the few instances where I've said to myself, I think this one is going to sell really well, it was the opposite. It's usually the photo that I don't expect that does better. And even if you look at like a lot of like musicians, like I've heard so many bands talk about, we just kind of threw this song on and we didn't really think anything of it, and that's the song that's like their number one hit. So you just have to shoot what interests you, do what you believe is visually cool, and maybe people will connect with it, maybe they won't, but at least it made you feel good doing it.
Mm-hmm. It's like you create for yourself first and foremost, and then just hope the audience likes it.
Yeah, and they may never get it. I mean, look at Van Gogh. He sold one painting while he was alive.
Yeah.
right? But I mean, history shows, sometimes people don't get it until long after the fact, and that's okay. But as photographers, we have the ability to do personal projects. We have the ability to do commercial projects. So, maybe you work for a newspaper and you shoot photojournalism and you get the record shots of the politicians cutting the ribbons and all that. I mean, Ansel Adams did plenty of commercial work that nobody knew about, while he was also doing the landscape work that he eventually became famous for.
Yeah.
What would you say are like your inspirations overall, photographers or anyone else?
Great question. Thank you. So I really believe in like cross training. And I don't just mean in a physical sense, but like mentally too, and inspiration wise. So it's not just photographers. I'm a passionate music lover. And I also just love the arts, whether it be films, painters, musicians, of course. I really like Tim Burton movies. And I find that as far as photographers are concerned, the ones that really inspire me most. So first is Ernst Haas. Ernst Haas had a quote that blew me away, and it was, "There is you and your camera. The limitations in yourself are within you. The limitations in your photography are within you. For what we see is what we are." And that broke me out of this box that I was in when I first got started, where I was sort of like a light snob. I would only go out at sunrise or sunset during the magic hour. And I was like, always, well, there's no clouds tonight. It's kind of a clear night or whatever. So this isn't ideal. And Ernst Haas's quote was like, "Hey, you're basically limiting yourself. What are you doing?" And that just broke me out, and it allowed me to expand, to shoot all day long with the idea of creating something anyway. So I thought that was really important. And then his work, like the book, The Creation, is just a masterpiece. If you get a chance, it's kind of hard to find on Amazon, but you could probably Google it and see some of the images that way. So I love Ernst Haas. I also really, of course, enjoyed Ansel Adams' work. Elliot Porter and his detailed looks at nature were pretty spectacular for me. And then there was another photographer more recently. His name is Jim Brandenburg. And Brandenburg worked for National Geographic for a long time. He took like 1 million photographs. And through his own admission, he got kind of burnt out. He was just feeling like tired, and he'd taken so many pictures and he'd been all over the world, and he was just feeling a little creatively uninspired. So he did this project, a personal project, where he only allowed himself to take 1 photo a day. Not like 10 photos and picking the best, but like 1 click of the shutter a day for 30 days. And in this project, what happened was like he reconnected with his passion for photography, and he found ways to show not necessarily the postcard of the rainbow, but like the raindrops on a raven's feather. And he just reconnected with his love of nature and photography, and it brought him back to his passion. So I really like Brandenburg's work. So those are just a few. There's so many others, though. I could go on and on. We would run out of time.
You're good. Yeah, I can vouch for Elliot Porter. His book is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
He is, yeah. What he did was not easy. Like he would photograph the forest floor, and you would think that's sort of an easy thing to do. It's actually quite difficult to do it well. So he had this amazing way of bringing attention to smaller details in nature and finding order in chaos. It's pretty remarkable.
Mm-hmm. And back then, I'm sure shooting on film with the depth of field and all of that, it was probably very challenging.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we're pretty lucky now.
His early bird shots too are some of like the first like frozen in motion wildlife photography as well. Kind of an industry leader in that department as well.
Absolutely, really beautiful. I guess the last, just changing sort of genres, I really liked Gary Winogrand, who did a lot of street photography in New York. He had a really unique way of photographing people and kind of showing people's personalities in a candid way. Of course, Henry Cartier-Bresson, sort of the godfather of photography. And it's pretty amazing to me that we could go on YouTube and watch like a 45-minute documentary of Bresson talking about photography today. If you haven't done that, it's worth doing because he has quite an interesting perspective on it. It's pretty amazing.
I know in our previous podcast episode, we talked about creative projects, and you brought up personal projects at the beginning. Henry and I have done a 3 photo series. Have you done one of those?
Yeah, I love photo series. And the cool thing is with Lightroom and just being able to make like collections and just organizing your photos that way, it makes it really easy to keep track of. So I did a whole series of country living when I lived in the Berkshire Mountains for a while. And it was like the coldest winter I've ever experienced, but so spectacularly beautiful. And I was just trying to document how people lived kind of off the grid in the country when like the GPS signal cuts out and there's no Wi-Fi and you're left to your own devices. And these people would set up their barns and their homes in such charming ways. And I would drive around with my snow tires on, with my camera in my front seat, and just be moved by how beautiful these scenes were. So I did a whole series on that. I'm doing something now on the sky. I call it Cloak of Heaven. It's just like different ways that the clouds appear and the different shapes and patterns that happen right from my backyard. And I'm just using a telephoto lens. It's like a 100 to 300 millimeter lens, and I focus in on like specific areas of the sky, and it's pretty fascinating what is out there. So just a couple that I'm doing.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing the results in the sky one. It's really cool.
Yeah, I'll keep at it. I mean, that's the thing with personal projects. I mean, there's no deadline. It could keep going for years. Who knows?
Yeah.
As long as you want it, to last.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You have any other projects or anything else?
So for me, right now, it's about connecting with people both in New Zealand and in the States, and really helping. I see like a major sort of issue with photographers and like computers that are just a disaster, for lack of a better term. Like photos on memory cards, flash drives, external hard drives, computer hard drives that are about to crash because they're so packed with data. So it seems like people are really struggling with image organization. So I'm trying to help people through teaching Lightroom and how to create a good workflow and a backup and something that makes sense for them. That's one thing I'm working on. And then, of course, just teaching the joys of photography. It's, some people get so frustrated because cameras are sophisticated now, especially now that like mirrorless cameras are becoming more prevalent. They're amazing, but they're mini computers and not everyone is really computer savvy. So it's frustrating to people. And I'm trying to sort of simplify and show people the art of photography and the joy of photography. And it doesn't have to be this mind-bending, painful experience. It should be fun.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's great philosophy.
So yeah, what is there any the episode here? Is there anything you want listeners to take away from our talk today?
Well, I feel like, since everyone has a camera in their pocket, I think a good question to ask is like, well, what do you want to share with the world? And that answer may evolve over time. You might not have it right now, and that's okay. Like we were talking about earlier, I don't think you should limit yourself in any one genre of photography. So be open to exploring different types of photography and just literally exploring your own neighborhood with your camera. And I think you'll find that anything is possible, as I found in my own career. Now, if you're feeling lost in your pursuit of photography, really don't sweat it. Sometimes we need to get lost, we need to wander in order to find the right path. So keep that in mind and don't lose heart. This is a lifelong journey. It's definitely, not a sprint. It is a marathon. This is something you can do for the rest of your life. So I've been doing it for 25 years and I'm still super passionate about it. I love it. And it's just so great to be able to come on here and chat about it with you guys and share this with other people. So if there's anything I can help with, I'm easy to find. I'm sure my website will be in the notes. It's just nzphotoschool.com. But thank you guys so much. This is really fun.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
It's my pleasure, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching the All Outdoors Photography Podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and the video version on YouTube as well. You can subscribe down below, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you.